All right, let's start. Welcome, everyone. Go. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining this session about the IANA Stewardship Transition. It is a long-awaited transition and a process that has taken a long time to kick off. It was triggered last March when the government of the United States finally announced its readiness to transition the historical oversight role of the IANA functions to the global multi-stakeholder community. So a process has been put in place and convened and is being convened by ICANN. And it is incredible the amount of work that from all parts of the world, individual members and organizations, members of the internet community, users, businesses, technical people, work that they have all volunteered in proposing a process first and building up a plan in a bottom-up for this transition to occur. It is a certified organic process, I think. This work by the community is unprecedented, and regardless of whatever happens with IANA, I think it deserves a place in the history of the internet. The community coming up together for a cause, and I think that needs to be recognized. Anyway, to my right, I have people that represent each of the IANA functions, basically names, numbers, and protocol and parameters. We call them affected parties, those that have a direct relationship with each of the IANA functions, and they will speak about the progress made in their own function areas with their own communities to build up this transition plan. To my left, I have people that represent different stakeholder groups indirectly touched by the IANA, businesses, government, civil society, others. I just want to make a short note. Today, we have many proposals for public consultation. And these proposals are being debated as we speak. And debate is getting really hot, which is really good, as we come to a closure to building up a transition plan. But this session is not an instance to discuss those proposals. There are ongoing processes made for that. So if you have an issue or a comment about those proposals, I strongly suggest you to place your views in the appropriate place. It's on email lists and public consultations. The next big event is in the next ICANN meeting in Buenos Aires. You don't need to go to Buenos Aires to participate. There are multiple channels or remote participation to have a say. This session is to inform you about the process and to invite you to participate. So please bear that in mind and look forward for an informative and entertaining debate. I would just want to start to give the word to Mr. Tarek Kamel. He is from ICANN, the convening party of this important debate, to introduce us to this process, and then onwards I will go through the affected communities and then with the stakeholder groups, and obviously we should have a chance to have an interaction with the audience. Tarek.
Thank you very much, Pablo, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to be here today and at the WSIS Forum that is organized by the ITU, and that the IANA process is being presented as a role model, really, for global coordination in a multi-stakeholder forum. Indeed, as Pablo has mentioned, back in March 2014, the NTIA has formally asked ICANN to convene a multi-stakeholder process on a global scale in order to come up with proposals that would really provide the stewardship for the global community. The process then has started, as you have mentioned, and as will be presented. ICANN, from a staff level, it's Teresa Swinehart, actually, who's leading this process on behalf of the staff. And we are very happy that with the community response and with the involvement of the global community, whether government, civil society, or private sector. So I am here to relay the greetings of ICANN's management as well as Teresa. And if there are any questions later on, I would be happy within our remit to respond. beyond. So thank you very much, Pablo, for giving me the floor for this quick introduction, and we look forward for a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tarek. With those words in mind, I think we can start. Olivier is following mostly the names part of the transition proposal, the CWG, and he will talk about that and explain also the process at a higher level. Ready?
Right, thank you very much, Pablo. I'm told that it's not connecting at the moment, which is a bit of a small problem because we do need the slides. Okay. Shall I let you deal with this?
I know that you can
just as a side
well.
note, my computer has decided to die today as well, which is just another thing. I'm not good with technology today. Don't let me close to your laptop. In the meantime, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Olivier Crépin-Leblanc. I'm the Vice Chair of the At-Large Advisory Committee, and that's the part of ICANN that brings in the input of Internet end users into the ICANN processes. You should actually have received a sheet of acronyms, but I don't see everyone having one yet. It might be worth distributing it. Does everybody have a... Because we're going to use alphabet soup today, lots of acronyms, and we've lived in that for a year, but we realize that people haven't, and it's going to be very confusing if you don't have your glossary sheet here. So I would suggest that it gets distributed to pretty much everyone. In fact, I'll probably have to read some of the acronyms myself due to the difficulty. So effectively, do we have the slides? So it's difficult to do a presentation without the slides by referring to the slides themselves.
Would you have it in like an email or something?
It is online, yes. We have
Anyone
90
from
minutes,
the floor
so hopefully
has an introductory comment, I will welcome it before the debate starts. I will ask each of you to introduce yourself then, starting with the affected parties.
Okay, well, I'll be the second of the affected parties. My name's Chris Buckridge. I work with the RIPE NCC, which is a regional internet registry for Europe, Middle East, parts of Central Asia. We register and distribute IP addresses and other internet number resources. And so in this instance, we're representing the numbers community with a stake in the IANA numbering functions.
And good afternoon. My name is Elliot Lear. I work for Cisco Systems, and I was one of the co-editors of the protocol parameters component of the response to the anti-IA, and that was delivered by the IETF. I will speak about it. I do not speak for the IETF, however.
My name is Marilyn Cade, and I own a small business, but I suppose I'm here today because I was actually involved on behalf of business in organizing business around the world to be involved in 1997 and 1998 in the consultation that led up to the creation of ICANN. I speak for business users, not contracted parties. So the business users at ICANN are those who are using the protocols, who are using the domain names, who are using the numbers.
Hi, good evening. My name is Tracy Hackshaw. I'm from the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm from the Caribbean region. I am a member of the Governmental Advisory Committee in ICANN, but I'm not representing the GAC here today. I see several colleagues in the GAC in the room today who might better represent them. I'm representing governments from small states today. Thank you.
So, hello everybody, I'm Bill Drake, and I teach at the University of Zurich about internet governance and related issues, but I'm actually not here in that context. I'm here because I'm the chair of the Non-Commercial Users Constituency, which is a civil society coalition within ICANN with about 400 members that is focused on promoting non-commercial uses of the internet and protecting the interests of non-commercial users with regard to human rights, freedom of expression, and related issues.
Hello, I'm Marcus Kummer. I'm a member of the ICANN board, but I'm here not to speak on behalf of the ICANN board. Whatever I will say will express my personal opinion.
And I've already introduced myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of Olivier Crépin-Leblanc either. So let's move on. The technology is worked out now. So let's go to the first slide. And effectively, what we have here is the overall process that is being followed, and that was actually created by the communities concerned to reach the final point of being able to provide an answer to the NTIA request for a transition plan that should effectively be built up and that should take over its stewardship, its own stewardship of the IANA functions. We haven't spoken specifically about the IANA functions in great detail. There are three main functions. One to do with names. So you look at the root of the internet with the top-level domain names that are being coordinated there. There's another function that is to do with IP addresses. Every computer connected to the internet has an IP address. It's a single number, or it's a set of numbers, but it's a unique number, and those, of course, have to be coordinated, and the allocation of these numbers has to be coordinated around the world. And thirdly, the protocols. The protocols are actually designed by the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF, and that's effectively the language that the computers talk to each other with. There's a complexity with port numbers, etc. Two computers have to speak the same language to be able to talk to each other, and therefore there needs to be, with all of the new services that come on the internet, there needs to be some coordination with that. So NTIA, as Tarek mentioned, convened ICANN and asked ICANN to convene the different parties that deal with these three functions and to effectively provide some kind of framework for all of the parties to work on. But ICANN does not have any decisional process in any of the discussions that are taking place. So it just acts as a go-between, if you want, and also as a funder of some of the face-to-face meetings that have had to take place, etc. So ICANN, and we're dealing here now with the ICANN community, discussed with other communities out in the rest of the world, and the IANA Coordination Group was created, the ICG, and we'll talk about the ICG in a moment with the whole makeup of the ICG itself. The Internet Architecture Board suggested that really the communities directly affected by these processes, by the IANA processes, were the operational communities for these processes. So there was a decision made to basically ask the different communities to come up with a plan. And as I mentioned earlier, so the CWG stewardship was created. Now we're going to start going into acronyms. So CWG is always used as far as stewardship of the IANA function is concerned for the naming functions. CCWG, accountability, will be dealt with, dealing with all of the accountability side of aspects of the ICANN processes. There is a CRISP panel which was created with the different regional internet registries for working out a proposal on the numbers. And CRISP, and I have to read it, you see, the CRISP is the Consolidated RIR IANA Stewardship Transition Proposal Team. And then there's the IANA Plan Working Group that was convened within the Internet Engineering Task Force, and we'll hear about their processes in a moment. Those three communities worked and have to provide a full proposal back to the ICG. The ICG is supposed to bring the three proposals together, work out any discrepancies between the proposals, perhaps ask the communities for further input. That proposal then, when it's finished, is passed on to the ICANN board, who just acts as a mailbox, I guess, passing it on over to the NTIA. You'll see in a shaded, slightly blanked out process here, the CCWG on ICANN accountability is a parallel process that relates to the CWG stewardship on the screen, and that's another process that we'll go into in a moment. So let's first start with the ICG. The ICG is quite a lot of people. It was very open. It involved the majority of the really active organizations out there in communities, out in the internet, that had to bring their input into the process. We start with the Address Supporting Organization. They are the part of ICANN that deals with IP addresses. ICC Bases, the International Chamber of Commerce, primarily with businesses. ISOC, the Internet Society. NRO, the Number Resource Organization. This is an overall umbrella organization that works with the regional internet registries. The Internet Engineering Task Force, as we've said just a moment ago. The Internet Architecture Board. The Security and Stability Advisory Committee, the SSAC. That's a part of ICANN that deals specifically with the stability of the different functions, because primarily what we want is a stable internet. The RSSAC, that's the Root Server System Advisory Committee. There are a number of root servers around the world, all run by different organizations, and they have a committee as well, so they have a say into the process, obviously. The At-Large Advisory Committee, my community. The Governmental Advisory Committee, the world's governments that come together within the ICANN framework. The Generic Name Supporting Organization, particularly important because that's the part of ICANN that deals with designing the policy for generic domain names. Generic domain names are .com, .net, .org, those domains which are not the country code domain names, which we'll touch on in a moment. The GTLD registries, these are the actual contracted parties with ICANN that run the generic names, so the contracted party for .com and .net, .org, etc. And then we've got this CCNSO and non-CCNSO TTLD, CCTLD operators. That starts getting into the alphabet soup. That's the country code top-level domain operators. So for Switzerland, it's .ch, for Germany, .de, for UK, .uk. And they are also part of the process because, of course, they have their updates that go into the IANA database. And there are two types of participants there because there are also some country code top-level domain operators that do not take part in the ICANN processes themselves. They're not part of the country code domain name supporting organization. So they had to be very inclusive for everyone. There are a few liaisons on this big group as well. There's one ICANN board liaison. And that's they don't have any power of vote or anything like that, but obviously they have to tell the ICANN board what's going on. And there's also a dedicated IANA staff on the committee that effectively, because IANA is a function at the end of the day, it has people that work for this function, and they needed to be aware of the process. Now, the CWG stewardship, that's all about the names. They're absolutely insane to have conducted so many calls. There are a lot of participants in that working group. The working group is very open, so everyone has a say and is able to voice their points of view. We started out with very diverse points of view. We had 94 calls, and I think that was up until Istanbul, and we must have had another 20 or 30 calls ever since, each time 2-hour calls, and it's very taxing, 4,600 hours. It started out its work over at the end of October last year. Of course, the charter and all that had to be prepared before this, so it knew what its mandate was going to be. And immediately, a first draft proposal was put together with a face-to-face meeting in Frankfurt. And as with everything in ICANN, any proposal comes through a public comment process. So you get a pretty good idea quite quickly about whether you're rowing in the right direction or whether the community is not with you at all and wants some major changes made. So our first public comment process took place at the end of November. The response was not that positive for the working group, so a lot of work had to be done, and the working group reorganized itself in some small, very small groups that would basically try and advance the process. We had intensive work days in January. These are work days when you basically give up everything else in your life and just stay on the phone most of the day. And at ICANN 52, the last ICANN meeting that took place in, was it Singapore, there was a meeting and at that point it was clear that there were some issues with regards to the legal process and whether the proposal was actually working with the legislation that it was proposed in. So we had a legal input that was brought in, another meeting in Istanbul, and it went on. There was, after that, after the meeting in Istanbul, so I think we're here, small design teams were all working in parallel. And with the help of the legal input, we reached a second proposal, which was put up for public comment about a month ago. The commenting process has just finished, has just concluded. Now we're at the end of May, so right here, and we're now analyzing the public comment, and we'll make some changes to the proposal depending on the comments that were received. A total of 254 pages of comments, and we have a week and a half to go through them. So great fun. What's coming up from here onwards? We're going to go, so we got the second public comment. We're right here. We're going to build a final proposal that will then have to be sent to ICANN's supporting organizations and advisory committees, and they will have to say, yes, we like that, we're okay with this. That will then be passed over to the ICG, and the ICG will bring that together with the proposals from the other communities, the Internet Engineering Task Force and the regional internet registries, and the ICG, if all goes well, will work over the summer, so no holidays for these guys, pass it over to the ICANN board, and the process will end with a proposal that will be sent over to the NTIA. The accountability track, which I spoke about a little bit earlier, and I'm sorry, Pablo, yes, there's a few more. The accountability track is important because ICANN is a little bit different with regards to the other communities. ICANN is actually the current IANA, the current operator of the IANA functions, and at the same time, ICANN is also the policy development for domain names. So there needed to be some kind of process to make sure that there was some accountability that was there, because so far the accountability rested mostly on the US government bringing that accountability forward and making sure that trains ran on time, that, well, things were working well, that the functions were performed in according to service level agreements, etc., etc. Of course, an organization then had to also make sure that it looks at itself and is accountable. And so an accountability process was launched with the CCWG accountability, another working group, very open, lots of people on there, to come up with a CCWG, with a proposal for accountability, for ICANN accountability, that will go through the ICANN board and will also be part of the overall document that will be sent to the NTIA. Just quickly here, they've got 26 members, 154 participants. It can get very chaotic on some of the calls because there's so many people, but they are progressing rather well. A lot of calls, a lot of meetings, lots of working hours. I'm not going to go through each one of the working groups that are currently working. They are also afforded legal input because a lot of the processes have some kind of legislative issues related to them. And when you deal with contracts and so on, you do need to make sure that things are actually going to work. They have a very large schedule ahead. They've just launched their first public comment. It started on the 4th of May. That is still open at the moment for the next couple of weeks. I would really encourage you to have a look at the first proposals they've come up with and to comment and bring your input into this. It's early stage. They have a very compressed timeline, but all of the comments are going to be taken into account. Past this, there will be a second public comment that will start right in the middle of the summer on the 20th of July. Again, 30 days. It's compressed because we haven't got that much time until the deadline that the NTIA has set everyone. And then in October, there will be that proposal, like the CWG proposal, will have to be passed by all of the ICANN supporting organizations and advisory committees. So that's where it goes out. And a second part of the work of this working group will be to do with implementation. It's great to make plans, but you have to implement them, and that will also be done with the input from the community, and it's forecasted that there will also be some public comments around that time. That's the work of just the naming side. We're now going to look at the CRISP. That's the work for all of the IP addressing. Chris. I'll stay there and I'll flick through the things, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so yes, my name's Chris Buckridge. As I said, I work for the RIPE NCC. I'm not actually part of the CRISP team, which I'll explain a little more as we go along, but that means that with apologies for doing this one more time, I'll say I'm not speaking for the CRISP team, obviously, but I am speaking about and to the process that the CRISP team followed, which has been completely open and transparent, and also to and about the CRISP team proposal, which was submitted and published on the 15th of January, and so is in the public for anyone to look at and comment on. The ICG, which Olivier spoke about, did us quite a service in the initial stage of this by identifying and noting that there are three distinct communities of the IANA functions. And they did that because those three communities actually have quite distinct and different relationships to the IANA functions, to how they're managed, to the relationship with the operator, to how policy is developed. In terms of the numbers community, which is the RARs and their communities, and certainly similarly to the IETF, as you'll hear about, what that means is that we have community-driven policy processes of very long standing, which are really quite separate to the IANA operator, ICANN in this case. And so this process about the stewardship of the IANA functions really has nothing to do with those policy-making processes for the numbers and for the IETF protocol parameters, which makes us really, hopefully, a much more straightforward process than the names community, and hence why I have 2 slides today rather than more. But so yeah, I will go through the process, and this slide has a sort of a very brief summary of what that was. In June 2014, following the announcement by the US government and following the identification of these 3 separate communities, discussions began in all of the RARs in their open policy forums about what this would mean, how this would be done. And that then resulted in the 4th quarter in 2014 of assembling this CRISP team, Consolidated RAR IANA Stewardship Proposal Team, to actually put together a proposal based on the feedback, the input of those 5 regional internet registry communities. Part of that was forming a global discussion platform, that's IANA Transfer at nro.net, and that's really been the central forum for discussing and assembling, working on this proposal since that time. In January 2015, as I said, that proposal was completed, and that was done through a process which involved the CRISP team, which is 15 members, 3 from each regional internet registry community, and of those 3, 2 were community members, 1 a staff member from the RAR. So that reflects that this is actually a relationship between the RAR and the IANA operator operationally, but obviously with input and the interest of the community themselves. That proposal, which was put together and discussed and finalized in January, had a number of, and here I'm speaking very high level, it noted some priorities, and priorities of those communities really were the stability and reliability of these IANA functions, and the autonomy and the ownership that the numbers community have for those numbers-related IANA functions. In practice, what that meant from the proposal was that the CRISP team proposed replacing the contractual arrangement between the NTIA and ICANN with a contractual relationship between the RIRs and, in this case, ICANN, or more generally, the IANA functions operator. It also did a couple of other things, which I'll mention here. It established, or proposed establishing, a community review team, which would actually give the community themselves more input into monitoring and observing, stewarding that relationship between the RIRs and the IANA operator. And it also clarified a number of intellectual property rights issues that arise from the management of the IANA functions. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So this is just a diagram to show really the process over time. And so you can see here the 5 regional internet registry discussions going on: AFRINIC, APNIC, ARAN, LACNIC, and RIPE. And those represent the 5 regions across the world. Those discussions were pulled together by the CRISP team, which then produced the single proposal, which it delivered to the ICG on the 15th of January. And so the line going straight through there, continuing, is the process by which the ICG will pull together all of the 3 community proposals and deliver a single proposal to the NTIA. That's as Olivier described. What it has meant, though, is that there are a number of parallel processes going on as we speak in the numbers community. One of those is that when this proposal was developed, it shifted then to the RIR staff to develop a text for what the SLA between the RIRs and the IANA function operator would look like. And there was a commitment to do this in an open way, following the principles laid out by the CRISP proposal. And on the 1st of May this year, a first draft of that SLA was published, and that's open for community comment until the 14th of June. There's also work going on to define that review committee, which I spoke of earlier, and so that's basically establishing the parameters for how that, a charter for how that review committee would work, selection processes, which will be based on regional processes, and this is all ongoing work by the RIRs, by the CRISP team, and by the community. So I think at that point we sort of want to step back and say, okay, what have we learned, I guess, from this process? What does this sort of process say about the multi-stakeholder model, multi-stakeholder policy making or decision making? And as I said, for the numbers community, this IANA process is rather straightforward, I think, certainly compared to the names. But we see here that even in a relatively straightforward process, there really are a number of moving pieces, moving parts going on. And so that sort of puts the emphasis then in this on things like clarity of forums where there's discussion, on outreach to make sure that all stakeholders are actually involved, on clarity about the roles that these different actors play, whether it's the CRISP team or the community or the RIRs themselves. I think certainly to date this has been a very successful process in the numbers community. We've all been very, I think most people have been very happy with the way the process has gone and with the way decisions have been made. And certainly a note to end on here, I think, is that the RIRs and the CRISP team are very optimistic about this process, that this will end in a positive result for all the IANA stakeholders. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the process regarding the Internet Engineering Task Force and the developing of the proposal for the protocol parameters component. To do that, I think we would have to start with, well, what is a protocol parameter? How many people know what a protocol parameter is at this point? Well, that's great. All 4 of you. All right. So let's be engineers for just a moment. Can you hit the space bar on that? I think I have some circles that will come up there, I hope. If you, oh no, I guess they got lost. Okay, so if you look at this is the TCP header. This is part of an IP packet that gets shipped across the net anytime you're using the web or email or voice. This little guy here is in each of those packets. And if you see on the right there where it says destination port,
That's a number, and that number is registered so that we know which application is actually going to be used by the end system. Well, there's a registry for that, and that is what that's the protocol parameters registry, and that registry exists for each, well, not for each, but for many IETF protocols, and that's pretty much what ICANN administers for the IETF as the IANA functions operator. And that's the thing that we responded to. This is the issue, the activity that we were responding to as part of the ICG solicitation. If you'll advance to the next slide. So, okay, you can take your engineering hats off. So how do things work today? Well, you know, somewhere in the IETF, a proposal is made for a new protocol, and an IANA registry may be part of the section of the document that talks about how to extend the protocol so that the underlying protocol doesn't need to be rewritten each time we add an extension. And any individual then, once the protocol is out there, may apply for an assignment for a specific protocol parameter. By the way, anybody can propose a new protocol at the IETF or participate in that. All it requires is an email address. And then we have a set of policies that can be used to determine how decisions are made with protocol parameters. They range from first come, first served to the need for a new standard. And all this is, of course, documented. And when the protocol is developed, the community decides which policy is appropriate. And then the policy is applied based on what is being requested. And then every decision that is made is subject to dispute resolution. If there's a technical expert that is asked to review a proposal and the proposal is rejected, the applicant can appeal that effectively. And these processes have been in place for a long, long time. This is all about protocol parameters and how they're issued. Next slide, please. All right, so fast forward to August 2014, and the ICG solicitation was being developed. And so the IETF got together, and we do what we always do when we have something to talk about. We hold a birds of a feather session. And everybody gets into a room and says, okay, what are we going to do about this? And, well, we have to come up with a proposal to give to the ICG. So what do we do about that? We do what we always do. Somebody writes an internet draft. This starts as a basic contribution in using the ITU vernacular, but we use internet drafts. They're written in a very limited form, old form ASCII, in fact. And so I actually wrote the first version. And then at the same time, the Birds of a Feather session said, well, how are we going to make decisions? Well, we create what we always do. We create a working group. And so a working group was created right there in the first point, right around the first week of September. And then the working group held an interim meeting in October, and they took a look at the draft that I wrote along with Russ Housley, and they said, okay, this looks like a good start. So they adopted it. And the IETF community commented on it heavily. In the span of about 4 or 5 months, that document underwent 10 revisions. So there was a lot of discussion, both in email and in person. We held an in-person meeting in Hawaii in November. And then once the document settled down a little bit, we recognized that there was a time frame that the NTIA had requested we complete our work, and the ICG had put forward a time frame, and we attempted to meet it, and actually we did. And so the working group did what's called the last call and received comments. And anybody was welcome to provide comments, as they always are. And then the working group sent the document forward to the Internet Engineering Steering Group, which then reviewed the document, provided additional comments, and then approved the document in January. And then we forwarded that along to the ICG. It's worth noting, as I mentioned earlier, that every decision that the IETF leadership makes is appealable, and this one was. And the appeal went to the IESG, and it was not, however, sustained. I believe there are still a few weeks left with which the appellant may choose to appeal to the next level, and eventually if you wanted to go all the way to the Board of ISOC. So at this point, names and numbers are still working. Numbers is finished. Names still working on theirs, and ours will get tossed into the mix. The IETF did say in its submission that they are generally very satisfied with the work and effort that the ICANN puts in. We're satisfied with the results in terms of the IANA functions operator and how it works for the IETF community for the protocol parameters. There are small changes that have been requested, and those are being handled by between the IETF and ICANN in terms of the logistics of those changes. And that's all I'll have to say. I hope I was the shortest person there, because ours is probably the most mature, I think, component here. So we didn't have to do any new processes for this.
Very much, Elliot. So what has been described so far is the process and the proposals entirely developed by the Internet community, meaning all of those that are affected or serviced by IANA, on a voluntary basis to transfer the historical oversight role of the government of the United States on these specific functions. And this is just in response of an announcement made in March last year. So this is the product of a work that has been developed by the Internet community in less than a year of time. I think that is quite impressive. So on my right hand, I told you, have the affected parties, those directly affected by the IANA services. On my left hand, I will go through different sort of stakeholder groups. One very important one is governments, and I will ask Tracy to talk about what you think about what you saw in this process.
All right, thank you, Pablo. Good evening. I just wanted to say once more time that I'm not representing the views of the Governmental Advisory Committee of ICANN. I'm treating with governments that, somehow remove from the process, governments in small states. I see colleagues from the GAC in the room, and I'm sure they would join in at some appropriate time to give their views. However, I was a vice chair of the GAC, and I was part of the process to put together the team that went into the ICG and the CWG and so on. So I have some insight into what happened, and one of the first things I would say is that governments themselves, as you would have seen in the room, are a bit challenged by the entire process. All the nuances and idiosyncrasies were not very well known until they were surfaced to us, I guess, by the entire process and by ICANN. So for governments, it's a very new thing, and there's a reason for that. Governments themselves are a different beast, as many of you would understand. People cannot sit in a room representing a government and represent their own views. They must represent the views of governments. And this is, I don't want to be controversial, but in theory, governments represent the views of the entire country. They represent the views of their citizens, their businesses, all their stakeholders, and that, I don't want to be controversial, but that's how governments are viewed in theory of government. So from that standpoint, governments can be seen as someone who is multi-stakeholder by definition. So it's a very different process for governments, and governments need to go back home and consult with their home offices, and in many cases, and I think there's some countries that do it very well, consult with their citizens through a multi-stakeholder process and return to provide input into this entire process. So for governments, the speed in which this is moving, the entire approach is a challenge, and that's something that has to be recognized. And drilling down a little deeper, I come from a small island state, and for us, these issues are not exactly the burning issues of the day, the issues of the root of the internet and what's happening with the transition. So for governments to take this view forward into an ICANN environment and into other sessions, they need to do extra work in these countries to sensitize their stakeholders, to work closely with probably regional bodies. I think that happens with all governments, to work regional and try and formulate positions. And just on that note, for those who are familiar with the ITU, you know that the ITU takes a very regional approach to doing business. In this environment, it's a little different. And I would say that there were attempts to be regional in the ICANN government space. It may not have worked as well as it could have. So governments who represented ICANN in the process are theoretically from regions, but the entire GAC, which is the Governmental Advisory Committee, is not itself regional. So even though that would have happened, the positions they're coming back to the GAC with would have to be all of GAC positions. Hope that's not confusing you. So again, that's another complexity to the process. And just to wrap up my entire quick little issue, the issue of the DNS and the issue of DNS as a whole in smaller countries is very important for several reasons, but not for the reasons that are being articulated here, as far as we understand it to be. We use it to deal with critical internet infrastructure. Many of our small countries are affected by disasters or need to worry about those issues. And when these issues come up, we look at security and stability as our major concern. Some of those issues are not really surfacing in the process, even though they've been raised, and it's gotten very operational, it's gotten very procedural. So from a governmental perspective, those are some of the concerns that will be continuing to be raised with ICANN as to how the issue of the root and the issue of the DNS can continue to be secure and stable in the midst of this entire process that's changing today. So just quick 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tracy. Marilyn.
Thank you. My name is Marilyn Cade. When I became involved in the internet, there were 4 million users. I was 4 at the time, right? Not quite true. When we created ICANN, businesses became involved because we saw the risk to how this very important, perhaps, infrastructure might help us do business. In 1998, there were 147 million users on the internet, and they were largely in 9 countries. I was very fortunate to work for a very large corporation whose name some of you will recognize, AT&T, and my client was AT&T Research Labs. And the research labs was very involved in using the predecessor to what became the internet for moving research data. And we had relationships with universities in Japan and in New Zealand and in Europe in moving research data. But what happened in 1998 was the kind of the vision that this infrastructure could become a commercial infrastructure. But the businesses who were interested in helping to create what was first called NUCO and eventually named ICANN didn't really understand the promise of the internet. They were looking at it because users were looking at it as moving corporate data. There were very few end users. So fast forward to today when we have 3 billion users, and just as a lark, I watched the instant internet stats for a minute and a half, and 2,000 new users joined the internet in less than 2 minutes. Businesses at ICANN participate not just, there are contracted parties that choose to be a registry or a registrar, and they, in essence, have a contract with ICANN to perform a particular function. But that is not the part of business that I represent. I come from and represent the businesses who are users, who actually they prefer not to know about the protocol parameters. In 2005, AT&T chief scientist was speaking at a CTO council, and as a lark, I asked him to ask the other CTOs a quiz question at lunch, and that is, who in your company, we're talking Fortune 500 companies at this CTO lunch, who in your company operates your DNS? It took the CTO of a large financial company 6 months to find out who it was. It was a trick question. In business, we want this to work well and reliably. We must have secure, stable, and resilient operation of these technical elements of the internet so that we can then go out and build businesses and social services and e-government applications on top of this reliable infrastructure. So at ICANN, what drives business users to be involved is the SSR issue, the security, stability, and resiliency issue. Not so much because it's the technical people from our companies who come, it's largely policy people. But it's people who have deep contacts back to their companies who are thinking about how the internet is going to help them reach the next 100 customers or the next 1,000 customers, or help to build an infrastructure in a country that today is just beginning to really bring the internet to its citizens. We're part of a group that was referenced earlier called the business users operate inside a group called the Generic Name Supporting Organization. But we also work much beyond that, where we work with the country code operators and we work with the Security and Stability Advisory Committee because of our concerns about the overall operation. One of the things, if you haven't been to your first ICANN meeting, we don't use, you won't find me with one of these there. And we all interact really kind of on an equal footing in our exchange of views. And that is a real value added to engaging in multi-stakeholder interaction. People have different roles and responsibilities, certainly the governments do in the public policy area, but you find a really open discourse. We do something called public consultations, and even if you yourself cannot attend an ICANN meeting, you can contribute to the decisions we make by posting comments in our open consultations. And for any of you who haven't come to an ICANN meeting or want to talk more about it later, I'll be around. I'm happy to talk to you about how to make your voice heard.
Thank you, Marlene. Bill?
Thank you very much. Well, I mentioned that I'm the chair of the non-commercial users constituency, so I guess we can all say the word users quite a lot at this table. And in fact, more generally, I think we've heard the word community quite a few times in this presentation. It could almost be a drinking game each time one of us says it. And I think it's important to note that as you look at this table, there are no ICANN staff on the table. We have somebody who's joined the board of directors in the past year, but otherwise what you are looking at is indeed elements of a big, diverse, global open community, which is a very interesting and unique way of doing global governance of a critical resource like the internet. And it's precisely because of that that we wanted to emphasize that by having this kind of composition in this meeting. As Marilyn suggested, the participation is completely open. Anybody can come into the meetings, anybody can join our processes online, anybody can get involved in the public consultations and so on. And from the standpoint of civil society, that's quite a big deal. As somebody who's been around global information and communication technology policy institutions for the past 30 years, and spent a lot of time looking at the way things work intergovernmentally as a scholar and as a policy advocate, I have to say that ICANN is quite extraordinary in the extent to which it is open to civil society and allows civil society to really engage in a very meaningful way. And I guess that's the main point that I should emphasize here if we're doing stakeholder perspectives. We have got, from our civil society coalition, people who are actively engaged in all phases of this process that Olivier showed you. In the IGC, which coordinates the whole process, in the group that's managing the IANA transition proposals and so on for the naming community, and also in the, we didn't talk much about it, but the parallel process around enhancing ICANN's accountability In fact, we have people here in the room, members here in the room, who are very actively involved in that stuff. We've got about a dozen people in each of these different groups, and they are able to get their ideas on the table and to be seriously considered in a way that is really quite unique. Our ability to participate directly in drafting proposals and advocating solutions and putting forward models, in negotiating, as Marilyn said, on a peer-to-peer, equal footing basis with colleagues from major corporations and governments and so on, in order to try to arrive at a solution that is broadly sustainable by the global community is quite amazing. And I have to say, I'm fairly happy with the extent to which our views have actually been brought in this process. Civil society was an early and I think fairly loud advocate for separating the IANA functions for operations from the policymaking activities, for example. And some of our members had quite strong ideas about this. They wanted complete, total separation from ICANN. Others were more able to accommodate a different kind of approach. At the end of the day, through back and forth with lots of different parties, we came to an approach which is embodied in this current proposal that's on the table now, which would envision there being a separate, legally separate subsidiary of ICANN operating the IANA functions, with the possibility of separation, further separation, if later on the global community felt that the functions were not being performed effectively. And the fact that those ideas were able to be brought into the discussion, taken seriously, and taken up by a lot of other parties, and we found common ground, is to me very heartening. And the same thing I think has been true with regard to the accountability discussions. We have been very actively engaged in promoting notions of having more effective independent review decisions, having the ability to revise the bylaws, having the community driving a lot of the work that's done by the board and so on. This is very important, I think. The fact that civil society is able to engage in this way, in this process, alongside other parties, and find common ground. We may have lots of differences. That's inevitable. We all come from different parts of the, quote, market, politically or so on. But nevertheless, there's a shared commitment to having a multi-stakeholder, broadly supported, globally accountable and transparent and inclusive solution. Everybody's on board that model. And we've been able to find a lot of space where we share objectives with our partners from other parts of the community. So it's really been quite an extraordinary thing, and we're very happy that the process has been handled the way it has. And we're hoping that going forward, we're going to be able to bring more people into the process as well, which is precisely why we're doing this session here. So I'll stop there. I also have 35 slides I'd like to show, but no, I will stop here, and I turn to Marcus instead.
Thank you, Bill. Before giving the mic to Marcus, I want just to flag a couple of tweets that just came up, and I think Marcus can talk about them. They are from Arun Sukumar from Delhi, who I hope he's following us remotely. Or you are there. He says, news to me, the draft IANA transition proposal has to go through or approved by the ICANN board. Oh, also news, the proposal to enhance ICANN's accountability has to be cleared by the ICANN board. Can you perhaps also dedicate some words about them? Thanks.
Thank you for that. And yes, well, I will try to be short. I recognize many well-known faces in the room who are obviously familiar with the process. I just wonder, and many thanks to all the people who spoke before me and the initial presentations, but the level of complexity is such that I wonder if people who are not really inside have been able to follow. And I will come back to this question, but I maybe would like to take a step back and look at where we were 12 years ago when we started the discussion on internet governance. The IANA function and the contract the US government still has with ICANN was very much at the heart of the discussion on internet governance. It was seen as the role of one predominant player, one predominant government, and that was rejected by many governments as inappropriate. So here we are at a really historical moment when this player is ready to give up the historical role it has placed. And let us also look at what was the role, and many has said that it was the US government that controls the internet, but this control was a very light hand on the tiller of the boat. It was basically checking for accuracy whether any changes in the root server had been done according to procedures. It was more the role of a well, that's what a stewardship actually implies. It was not the controlling function, it was just checking for accuracy, whether it has been performed correctly. Now, why all this talk then? What is all this big business if the role was not really that much? And I do remember when the US government announced it over a year ago, we had first discussions in Singapore, and then there were some people who said, yeah, it's true, the US government doesn't really do much, but because it's the US government that does that, means it is a lot. The US government has a big stick. And those who followed the news on what's happening in Zurich and FIFA realize that the big stick can reach very far of the US government. So the community basically is trying to make sure that there is some kind of control over the organization, which before was not really there, but it was there in theory because it was the big stick of the US government. Had the organization not performed, the US government would have withdrawn the contract, would have set up something else. But if the organization is let loose, many in the community felt there was a need for increased accountability. And this is fine. I think there is much to be said for checks and balances within any organization. Yes, it's maybe not particularly joyful to hear that, yes, we want to sack individual board members when it pleases us or the entire board. They say, we don't mean it against you personally, but it's just in case. But that is fine. Now back to the role of the board, I noticed that both the slides of CRISP and the slide of the IANA plan conveniently left out the role of the board, and they had a direct link from the ICG back to the NTIA. But no, and Olivier got it right. It is basically the board that passes it on. The question then is, will the board say no, or will the board pass it on with comments, or will the board just pass it on like a letter into the post? Now, the board has always made it clear that whatever we would say as comment would not come out of the blue, but it would have been communicated beforehand. The board made comments on the proposal on IANA, and basically saying this sounds like a workable proposal, but there are some questions and there are some details, and I think the other communities also had many questions. So, but I think essentially what we said is it is workable. Now let's work on the details. And the same will be with the proposal on accountability. The board will also be given the opportunity to comment. But and here I express my personal hope that it will be possible to pass on the proposals as they come consolidated out of the ISG to the NTIA. The NTIA has made it clear they will only accept the consensus proposal, and I think if the board signaled that they would not agree with the proposals, I don't think that would be a desirable outcome of this process. And yes, like others have said, this process was truly remarkable through its intensity, its inclusiveness. I have participated in some of the meetings, I participated in some of the calls, but I have total admiration for people like Olivier who participate in all these calls. This is a tremendous effort, and I think that needs to be recognized. All the hours of effort that went into the process, it is truly remarkable, and it gives, I think, overall ICANN very good marks at having created such a open, inclusive, and truly democratic process.
Thank you very much. We had a third of our session dedicated to an explanation, a bit less to the stakeholder groups, and I think here is where the most important part of the session should begin, which is opening the floor for comments, questions, and I absolutely could bet that the first one was going to be Richard Hill. Also, we need to consider if there are remote participants that want to participate. But of course, Richard, you are the first.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I just want to make some comments both on the process and on the substance to date. It certainly is a multi-stakeholder process. There's no question about that. But as we know, there are different flavors and variations of multi-stakeholder processes. And in fact, even in this one, there is. The right process is not exactly the same as the ITF process, and the names process is different. So I want to focus on some of the specificities of the process. Now, in particular, the name process. It's not exactly everybody equal. The people who are named by the ICANN constituencies have a different status from the speaking observers. Now, when you talk to the people in the process and the chair, they say, yes, but we're going to listen to everybody and treat everybody equally. But in fact, from a formal point of view, when you look at the terms of reference of the group, it's not the same, which is not the case with the ITF and the RRR, where really everybody was treated equally, at least from a formal point of view. Then how effective you are getting your views across something else. I'll come back to that. Now, the other thing that is specific to this process is that there are preconditions. The U.S. government has put certain conditions forward very clearly, the condition the process, and that was done unilaterally with no consultation, or at least no open consultation whatsoever. There probably was some consultation, but certainly no public consultation. So it is the U.S. government that set the parameters for the consultation, and as any number of people have pointed out, in the end, it will be the U.S. government who will unilaterally decide whether or not it accepts that proposal. So I would dispute that this is democratic in any meaningful sense of the word, except for the U.S. population. If you're a U.S. citizen, then it is a democratic process, because in the end, NTIA, which is controlled by Congress, is going to make a decision, and Congress is getting involved, as I think many people know. But for those of us, including me, who are not U.S. citizens, it's not a democratic process. That doesn't mean there's something wrong with it, and it doesn't mean that the output won't be good, but it's not what I would consider to be democratic. The other thing that has emerged now clearly is that ICANN kind of has a dual role. It's the convener of the process, but it's also a participant potentially through the board, and in fact it has started to make comments. And that's a little bit anomalous, because I thought that ICANN would simply be the convener of the process, and that the output of this was what ICANN wanted, but it turns out, no, the output of this is what, I'm not quite sure how to characterize it, what ICANN minus the board wants, and then the board is going to do something else, but the board is supposed to already represent the constituency, so this seems like a bit of an anomaly in the process. Then in terms of the actual substance, I think, Marcus, you're absolutely correct. It's very difficult to conceive of a non-insider following this process. I'm not an insider, but I do have a fair amount of knowledge of this process, and I gave up on trying to follow the accountability process. That's just far too complicated. I am following the other process, but even then it's somewhat difficult. It takes a considerable amount of time. As we saw, there are thousands of emails and subgroups, and some of it is very technical from a technical point of view, some of it is very technical from a legal point of view, so it is a difficult process to follow. And then, depending on how familiar you are with the process and how well known you are, your comments receive greater or lesser weight. And in particular, I don't feel that my comments were given sufficient weight, but that's just my opinion, of course. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. I will give the floor to some here, and then I'll propose a dialogue from the ones here. Please.
Thank you. My name is Kavus Araste. I'm not representing any government, nor ICG, nor CCWG, nor GAC. I'm just a participant following very continually all the meetings and so on and so forth. Every day, several meetings and so on. Let's comment on what Richard said. I am a participant on CCWG. Never, ever, any proposal that I made was rejected. It was put to the consensus. If consensus achieved, that's all. So the only thing you have to convince the people that you have a logic behind your proposal, and they never ask you, Kavus, they call me by first name, that you are participant and you don't have right to comment. I'm not a member of the CCWG, I'm participant of the CCWG. But all my comments were taken into account as appropriate. If there was no consensus, it was not agreed. But in a more constructive and more respectful manner. Never was any aggression at all from anybody in that. On the other hand, I am a member of the ICG, among the 30 members. The same thing has happened. For one single message sending to the ICANN board, we had 10 revisions, and the chairman of ICG, Alistair Cooper, went to many, many discussions in order to have consensus. Never we got to the vote, and never anything was rejected. So, in summary, as far as I understood, it worked in the most democratic, open and transparent and inclusive manner. Never ever proposals or suggestions of anyone has been rejected if it is accompanied with logic and argument and acceptable by the people and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, Pablo. Arun Sukumar from the National Law University, Delhi. I just want to follow up on Marcus' comments on the role of the ICANN board once the proposals have been submitted to the ICG, through the ICG and the CCWG on accountability, because it's still not clear to me as to why the ICANN board should play an intervening role once the proposals have been submitted, given that the ICANN board would have had a chance and has had a chance to comment on the draft proposal, especially to take on, to follow on the point of consensus that Mr. Ariste made, which is that if there is rough consensus on the proposals, then the ICANN board has an equal say as with any other stakeholder in a multi-stakeholder model. So to say that if the ICANN board has signals disapproval, then that would not mean consensus as required by the US government, seems to suggest that the ICANN board has in fact a veto on the process. Thanks.
Do we have any comments from remote participants? No? I will ask if any of the panelists would like to address some of the questions. Olivier?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pablo. Carlos Araste has very kindly responded to Richard's question, actually, and I was just going to say, in fact, originally the first charter of the cross-community working group on IANA Stewardship Transition spoke about having members and observers, and where observers would just be observing, they wouldn't have much of a say. There was a lot of pushback for that, and this is how the charter was changed before the working group started its work to members and participants. The only difference between members as appointed by their supporting organization, advisory committee, or organizations that have an official standing as such in this working group, and participants, which can be pretty much anybody who's interested and has the time to go through these hours and hours of calls, is the fact that if we do not reach consensus, and we work by consensus on everything, but if we do not reach consensus and we really are at a breaking point when there are two opposing sides, opposing views, there would need to be a vote, and only the members at that point would be voting. But we haven't reached that point, because we've reached the point when there's a definition of consensus that I heard once, which was consensus in a room is found where nobody is happy as they leave the room at the end of the meeting, which effectively means nobody got exactly what they wanted, but a middle ground was found for everyone to be okay with the solution that is there. The importance of the IANA function is such that we want stability and security, and we want the internet to continue working without any glitches or any problems. Many of the discussions we're having are discussions about control and things like that, and ending up with a solution where there will be no overall control by one specific stakeholder group is probably taking more time to discuss than the actual technical side, which we all agree on. I don't foresee a vote at the end of our process. I think we still have a few things to iron out, but they're just little details in the overall proposal. Thank you.
Maren.
Thank you. I'm going to give a different definition of consensus. I spent part of my career working in organizational development, and there's an OD game called the lifeboat game. And you put people into an organizational development challenge in order to help them learn about themselves or to learn about dynamics. In the lifeboat game, there's too many people, not enough seats in the boat, there's one oar, there's not enough food, not enough water, and you can get to land if you work together as a team, but people have to take turns swimming alongside the boat and acting as the oar in order to move the boat forward. There has to be a rationing of the food and the water in order to make sure that you can make it to shore. Now, some teams fail and people swim away from the lifeboat. Other teams succeed and they make it to shore. And the reason I like this analogy about consensus is probably nobody really liked the situation of being in the lifeboat, but they agreed to work together in order to reach a common goal. I kind of like that analogy when I think about our working together by consensus at ICANN or anywhere else. I don't think it's about being equally unhappy. I think it's about listening to each other and trying to find as much commonality as possible. And that's what represents consensus. If we understand that what we're doing is we're affecting a critical infrastructure, and my vote as a user may not actually be as important as the technical guys who can tell me that my vote is going to blow up the infrastructure. So I look at this as the more voices we have, the more informed participation we have, we're going to make better decisions.
From the IANA Stewardship Transition to a definition of consensus, that sounds interesting. Chris?
Just briefly, this sort of touching on the question from the back about the role of the ICANN board. This is simply sort of to repeat statements that the CRISP team have really already made. They've urged the ICANN board, the ICANN staff, to engage with these processes earlier on. So now to make their comments public on the draft contract SLA that's been put out, to make their comments on any issues they may have with how they see the three different proposals fitting together. And I think that sort of transparency is important. The CRISP teams actually also highlighted the need for that kind of communication between the three communities themselves, so between the CWG, the IETF, and the CRISP team, before it gets to a point where the ICG is actually putting them together, to make sure that any inconsistencies that might be there are actually ironed out. Because it's not in anyone's interest that this process falter at the last step or at later steps. The more we can do at the earliest stage possible in the process to make these proposals fit together, to identify what we see as a possible single unified solution for these IANA function stewardship, the better.
Please.
Hello. Hello? Yeah. Oh, hello. My name is Lori Schulman, and I am the representative of the International Trademark Association to ICANN, but I very recently came from the non-commercial users constituency. Yes, it does make sense, as I'm also very involved in nonprofit organizational issues and have been my entire career, so I've been very fortunate to kind of see the ICANN process from different angles, from different constituencies. I feel it's important to preface that, given my comments and interests in this. Number one, I want to go to Bill's point, which I think is very important, that how critical it is to continue to foster engagement, community engagement beyond the bubble or the walled garden that people have referred about ICANN to ICANN. I think ICANN, while appears closed, is actually very open. That once you decide to get involved, it's fairly easy to get involved. There are people there to help you. There are people there to mentor. That was my own personal experience over a decade ago, and I think it's true today as well. My second point, though, and would like anybody to address this, because it's a concern that I have as someone who is deeply involved in ICANN but has not worked on these particular working groups. I'm in the process of reviewing the accountability report that was issued on May 4th, and we recently reviewed the stewardship report, and it was very clear that the stewardship report and the accountability report completely depend upon each other. They're symbiotic in how they work. And my concern here is the speed of the process. I understand initially there is a September deadline, the unilateral yes from the federal government, the U.S. federal government, but the U.S. federal government has also very plainly said now they understand they will need extensions, that extensions are important to get it right. I think the community is standing, or most of the community agrees that the transition is a good thing, provided that we solve the accountability issues. So my question is, why this acceleration in the comment period? Because this is such vital and important work, and it is clear from the level of specificity within the reports. Very thoughtful work has been done, but I believe that the community is owed the time to respond equally as thoughtfully.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? Anyone else from the panel?
Yeah, I was just going to add 2 comments. I wanted to reinforce your point. Secretary Strickland has repeatedly said that the September date is a target date. And obviously we're working hard, I think. All the communities are working hard to try to meet the target, but I think it's pretty clear that at least some more time will be necessary. The other point I wanted to make was to the gentleman in the back in terms of not necessarily the ICANN board per se, but all communities need to be looking at these different proposals that are coming through. So in the IETF case, when the names proposal, the CWG proposal came out and comment was sought, well, what happened? It ended up in our working group, and the question that was asked was, how does it affect us? And well, we argued about it because that's what we do. And there was a response that came out from the IAB program on this point. There was not enough time to gain a consensus view. It was more questions to be asked than anything else. And of course, when additional revisions come out, we'll be asking, I'm sure, as a community, the questions. How does this affect us? How does the other community's proposal affect us? And I'm sure that the numbers community is doing the same thing, and the names community should be doing it with the work that we do. Thank you.
Bill, and then Marcus.
So just to Lori's point, I agree with you that, we have to have proper time for people to work through all these things. It's extraordinarily complex. Getting everybody's input in an effective manner and taking it fully on board, as Carlos suggested, it does involve a lot of cycles. There's no question about it. We have to recognize that this is a very special moment of institutional design that we have here, right? I mean, it's not very often in the evolution of the global economy and the global information infrastructure and so on that you are creating whole cloth, entirely new institutional mechanisms. And we're trying to do something rather remarkable, which is to create a mechanism that is accountable, moving from one government having this oversight to this broader engagement necessarily is going to be a very demanding thing. The problem is, of course, obviously, as you know, you live in Washington, there's also a political cycle in the states. And so we have a little bit of a contradiction there. There's also concerns about the way the WSIS review will go in the UN General Assembly and so on. So there are a lot of parameters, a lot of balls in play. But I think obviously everybody does recognize that probably more time is going to be needed. And hopefully we'll be able to find a way to get this resolved, I would hope, by June, but we'll
Thanks,
see.
Bill. We have Marcus, Carlos, and I don't dare to call Mr. Areste Cabuz.
Yes, just a brief comment on democratic as I used the word. I referred to the process, the ICANN internal. I get Richard's point. It's a unilateral decision by the US. The US government set the parameters. In that sense, not all governments were involved, but the internal ICANN process was truly democratic. Everybody can participate and is welcome to participate. And Kavus and Olivier made that point very eloquently. As regards the role of the ICANN board, just to make sure that I don't want to be misunderstood, it's clear that the ICANN board will pass on what comes out of the ICG to the NTIA. What is not clear is how this will be done, whether it will be done just put in a letter sent to the NTIA, or whether ICANN board will make some comments, maybe ask questions or not. And as I said, the worst outcome would be if the ICANN board, for one reason or another, decided to say this is not good. And there I fully agree with Chris. The call to be involved, I think, is important, and the ICANN board has made comments on the IANA proposal and will remain engaged, and hopefully we can find a common understanding. I would also say there is a considerable amount of expertise in the board. I don't count myself among those. I'm a new board member, but there are board members who have really considerable expertise, who know how ICANN works and who may have questions. You know, there are proposals. Are you really sure you want that because of this and because of that? And I think it is important that we all engage, and as several of the panelists have said, to have a real positive, constructive dialogue among all parties involved.
We have 3 minutes left. Carlos?
Okay, Carlos Afonso from CGI.br. Very quickly, I have 3 points, 3 quick questions. First, is there at this moment a complete compatibility between the CRISP and the CWJ proposals, is the first one. The second is there a possibility, or as an outcome, of oversight being done by a subsidiary structure of ICANN instead of by a completely independent structure? Are we risking a FIFA-like structure here, which I do not think will be accepted by the USG? And finally, I would like to ask the audience if there is anyone who was present at the congressional hearing on May 6th, in which there were very serious questions raised regarding ICANN's functioning and decisions and compatibility, consistency with its body laws in terms of its decisions. And if so, who were the stakeholders present in that congressional hearing? I would like to know, if possible, if anyone has the information. Thank you.
I don't know if we will have time to answer all of those questions, but those are great introductory questions to move this into the mailing lists and the fora that all of that is happening.
Thank you. Can I reply to one of the questions at least? Is there any compatibility between the CWG and the two others? The answer is we have to receive formal proposal for CWG would be at the end of the commenting period. Nevertheless, ICG has already started to do some internal review of the situation, and we have established criteria how to do that. Therefore, we are prepared, not we, ICG is prepared to do that. That is number one. Number two, the accountability is core item of that, and the Laurie Stridling sent a letter recently to CWG and to ICG and explicitly asked when the final plan coordinated is ready with the implementation. Just to give a flavor of the consultation, the ICG has sent that to the three communities, asked them, please indicate whether you have any date to indicate. Moreover, he also sent to the ICANN, to the board, and asking ICANN, if you have any comment with respect to the final and implementation, please directly send your comment to the community. And if you have any additional information that you want to share with the ICG, please do that. So there is a total amount of consultation, and we have a liaison board in the ICG. We have another liaison board in CCWG. We are in direct and permanent contact with ICANN board, and they are participating at the discussions. Thank you.
I think we're 1 minute later than the room next door, and the only request that I will ask you is to applaud louder than them. And with this, I will close the session then.